Ethan had never lied. He had never hit anyone. He had never done anything wrong. He only stayed silent. And that silence took everything from him. And the strangest part, no one warned him, because everything looked normal. Ethan woke up at 6:10 every morning without needing the alarm to ring a second time. The room was still dim, lit only by a thin thread of light slipping through the gap in the curtains. He stayed in bed for exactly one more breath, as if to confirm that today would be the same as yesterday. Calm, on time, trouble-free. He slid out of bed so quietly the wooden floor didn't have time to creak. In the kitchen, Ethan switched on the small light above the sink, careful not to wake the house too soon. Black coffee streamed into the cup, thin and steaming, fragrant and bitter. The taste was as familiar to him as his own life. He took a sip, the alertness spreading through his chest. Not the kind that excites, but the kind that says, ready to endure. In the mirror, he straightened his light blue shirt. Blue was safe, a color that drew no attention. Ethan liked things like that. He combed his hair neatly, fastened his cuff buttons, then glanced at the clock. 6:22. Soft footsteps on the stairs. Mia appeared in the kitchen doorway like a tiny shadow, hair messy, clutching her pillow tightly to her chest. She yawned so wide it looked like her jaw might fall off, eyes squinting against the light. Ethan bent down and kissed his daughter's forehead, a habit he had never broken, even on his busiest days. Mia mumbled, her voice still heavy with sleep. "Mia, Daddy, will you be home early today?" The question, so simple, always felt to Ethan like an invisible thread pulling him back toward home. He smiled, brushed her hair gently, trying to make his promise sound real. "Ethan, Daddy will try. Try." He chose that word every time. Not yes, not I will. Just try, a soft jacket thrown over the truth that sometimes he didn't get to decide. Mia nodded sleepily and shuffled toward the living room, where her school bag was already waiting. Outside the window, the sky wasn't quite light yet, the neighborhood still quiet, as if holding a secret. Lavra stood by the kitchen doorway, as though she had been waiting for the exact moment Ethan turned back. She held a thin stack of papers, but heavy enough to pull her shoulders down. Electricity, rent, tuition numbers that never seemed to shrink. Lavra wasn't the type to complain. She simply looked at life clearly, directly, like someone standing on the shore watching dark water flow past. She looked at him, no blame, no threats, but her voice carried a clear boundary. "Lavra, don't take on extra work you don't need. Just do your part." Ethan nodded immediately, out of reflex. He knew Lavra wasn't saying it out of selfishness. She said it out of fear. Fear that just one small misstep could make this home sway like a boat hitting hidden currents. Ethan set his coffee down and folded the papers for her, a gesture meant to reassure, even though he knew he couldn't fold away their worries. He could only live in a way that kept them from erupting. He had lived like that for years. He lived by a simple philosophy: don't get involved in other people's problems. Don't join arguments at work. Don't step up to play the good guy in meetings. Don't say anything others could grab onto and use to pull him under. By 42, Ethan had learned a truth painful but useful. One wrong sentence could make his entire family pay the price. The company was called Stonebridge Solutions, a name that sounded like a promise. Stone and bridge. Rock and passage. Solid. Stable. A place where people built careers step by step, without slipping, without surprises. But Ethan knew, names like that were often very good at hiding things. Inside Stonebridge, people smiled a lot. Polite smiles careful enough not to be called fake, but never warm enough for anyone to truly trust. Here, people learned to speak safe sentences, stand in safe positions, and avoid waters where one wrong step could get you pulled under. Ethan was used to it. He arrived on time, sat in the right seat, did exactly his part, and he wasn't close to anyone. Until Daniel Reyes transferred into his department. Daniel was rare at Stonebridge. He wasn't especially skilled at dodging trouble, and he wasn't overly careful with his words. Every morning, he greeted Ethan as if it genuinely mattered. "Morning, Ethan. Hope you had a good weekend." It wasn't a throwaway greeting. Daniel always paused, just a beat, as if he actually wanted the answer. Ethan usually just nodded, gave a thin smile, and sat down at his desk. But some mornings, that kindness made him feel uneasy. At Stonebridge, being too kind was usually a disadvantage. Daniel worked hard, quietly, without showing off. And because of that, he didn't realize he was standing too close to the edge. One afternoon, as Ethan walked past Daniel's desk to grab some documents, he saw Daniel suddenly stand up and hurry toward the conference room. Daniel's laptop screen was still on. Just for a second. An email line stood out, stark white against the gray background. Mistake found in the quarterly projection. Responsibility D. Reyes. Ethan stopped, not out of curiosity, but because he knew. He had been on that email thread. He had reviewed the file earlier. He remembered clearly. The altered number hadn't been Daniel's change. It was a last-minute edit from the team lead, the one always shielded by the most powerful name at Stonebridge, Mr. Hawthorne. Ethan stood there for one more breath. His heart beat faster than usual. Not out of fear, but because of a feeling he knew too well, the feeling when the truth stands right in front of you, waiting for you to speak. The afternoon meeting took place in a large glass conference room, where the white lights made everyone look paler. When Hawthorne walked in, the atmosphere shifted instantly. He didn't need to raise his voice. His presence alone pulled every gaze toward him. Hawthorne placed the folder on the table and slowly scanned the room. "We need accountability." His voice was calm, almost gentle. His eyes were not. They stopped on Daniel sharp and cold, like a blade already choosing its target. "Daniel," Hawthorne continued, "do you understand the damage you caused?" Daniel stiffened in his chair. Ethan saw his shoulders pull in slightly, as if he were trying to make himself smaller. "Sir, I didn't make that change. I can show the version history." Daniel didn't finish the sentence. Hawthorne tilted his head and smiled faintly. "Are you accusing someone else?" The question dropped into the room like a heavy object. No one moved. No one looked up. Everyone who had read the emails, who knew the truth, lowered their eyes to their laptops, as if the screens had suddenly become critically important. Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken. He knew the truth. He had been there. He could end this with a single sentence. "I saw it wasn't him, just say it." But in his mind, Laura's voice echoed clear, practical, emotionless. "Don't get involved." Mia's face appeared. The house. The bills on the kitchen table. Ethan looked at Daniel sitting alone in front of a room full of silence. Then he lowered his gaze. And Ethan chose to stay silent. After the meeting, Daniel caught up with Ethan in the long, narrow hallway, where the fluorescent lights made everything look paler than usual. Their footsteps echoed unevenly against the tiled floor, as if the entire floor were holding its breath. Daniel walked quickly but spoke very softly, his voice so low that Ethan felt the walls themselves were listening. "Daniel, Ethan, you were on that thread too, right? You saw the earlier draft?" The question wasn't an accusation. It felt more like a lifeline, thin, fragile hope that someone still remembered the truth. Ethan stopped. His throat went dry. He felt his heartbeat knocking against his chest, one beat at a time, uncomfortably clear. "Ethan, I'm not sure." 3 short words, broken. The moment he said them, Ethan knew he had dropped something, not responsibility, but courage. Daniel looked straight at him. His expression wasn't angry, not panicked. It was just tired. The kind of tiredness that comes when you realize you're standing alone. "Daniel, okay, got it." Daniel turned away, no more words, no pleading. Just a slight nod, like a period at the end of a conversation he had hoped would end differently. In the days that followed, rumors spread faster than emails. They crawled across desks, slipped into whispered conversations by the coffee machine. Daniel was incompetent. Daniel was hard to work with. Daniel always blamed others. The phrases were repeated often enough to become truth. At least in Stonebridge's collective memory, Ethan heard it all. He heard it passing meeting rooms. He heard it standing in line for coffee. He heard it when voices dropped and eyes flicked toward Daniel's desk. But Ethan didn't argue. He opened emails. He answered requests. He did his work as if nothing had happened. One afternoon, Ethan looked up from his screen and noticed Daniel's desk was empty. No jacket draped over the chair. No coffee cup. No crooked sticky notes. His first feeling wasn't shock. It was a cold confirmation, as if he had known this ending all along. A few minutes later, the company-wide email arrived. Daniel Reyes is no longer with Stonebridge. We wish him the best. We wish him the best. Ethan read the line twice. It was neat, polite, and hollow like closing a coffin and covering it with words. That evening, Ethan came home unusually early. The sky wasn't fully dark yet. The kitchen was still filled with late afternoon light, the rare kind that softened everything it touched. Lavra looked up when he walked in, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. Lavra, you're home early? Ethan opened the fridge, took out a bottle of water, and drank it in one long pull, as if trying to wash away a bitterness stuck in his throat. Ethan, Daniel, was let go. Lavra paused for a second, then shrugged. Not indifference, just reality, the kind they had both learned to live with. Lavra, that's how companies are. I just need you to be safe. The words landed lightly, but Ethan felt their weight. They made too much sense to argue with. And because they made sense, they kept him silent. Mia ran in from the living room, holding up a drawing, crayon colors still smudged. Mia, I drew our family. Ethan bent down to look. 3 simple figures holding hands. Him, Lavra, Mia. No shadows, no distance. No one left outside. Ethan smiled, but something in his chest didn't line up. Like a puzzle piece placed in the wrong spot. The picture was perfect, and because of that, it revealed what was missing. Inside him, there was space again. A week after Daniel left, Ethan received a text from an unknown number just before midnight. The phone vibrated softly on the nightstand, gentle enough not to wake Lavra. He picked it up, assuming it was spam or a wrong number, something harmless, easy to ignore. But there was only one line on the screen. I wish someone had spoken. No greeting. No name, no exclamation point. Just a single, bare sentence like a cut made with perfect precision. Ethan sat up, his back against the headboard. The pale blue light from the screen washed over his face, making his eyes look more tired than usual. He read it again, then again. The words didn't change, but the feeling did. It wasn't an accusation, not a complaint. It felt like a confession sent too late or a cry for help that had already run out of hope. Ethan's fingers hovered over the keyboard. He only had to reply. One sentence would be enough. One sentence to prove Daniel hadn't been alone. I'm sorry. I should have. I saw it. The words formed in his mind with such clarity he could almost hear his own voice saying them. He typed them out, then deleted them, typed again, deleted again. The cursor blinked, patient, as if it were willing to wait for him to do the right thing. But other images pushed in. Hawthorne in the conference room, calm voice, cold eyes. HR, with polite smiles and emotionless language. The mortgage numbers so long Ethan never remembered them, only the weight they carried. And Mia sleepy-eyed, asking every morning, Daddy, today you'll be home early? Ethan looked at the message one last time, then he pressed delete. There was no confirmation, no sound. Just an empty space where the words had been, as if they had never existed. Not because Ethan didn't care, but because he believed, truly believed, that silence would protect his family. That there were sacrifices one didn't speak of and burdens best left for others to carry. That night, Laura shifted in her sleep and instinctively rested her head against his shoulder. Her breathing was steady, warm. Ethan stayed perfectly still, afraid that even the slightest movement might shatter this fragile peace. Lavra, are you okay? The question came unconsciously, half asleep. But Ethan answered immediately, too quickly, too smoothly. "Ethan, I'm fine." The word came out so easily it surprised even him. It felt like a reflex he'd practiced for years, just like the way he said, "Daddy will try," every morning. Lavra gave a faint nod and drifted back to sleep. The room was quiet. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, one beat at a time, as if counting how long Ethan would still allow himself to hide. But after Lavra had fallen fully asleep, Ethan's eyes remained open. He stared at the ceiling, where shadows overlapped into vague shapes. For the first time, he didn't comfort himself with familiar excuses. For the first time, he didn't call silence wisdom or caution, and for the first time, he understood something cold and unmistakable. Silence didn't make him cleaner, it only made him harder to detect. 3 months later, everything seemed to have passed. No one mentioned Daniel anymore. His name disappeared from conversations, from old emails, even from Stonebridge's collective memory, as if he had never existed. Ethan grew used to that too. He worked steadily, came home on time, lived within a rhythm calm enough to convince himself that silence had saved him. Until one Wednesday morning when a meeting invitation appeared. Meeting room 118, 10 a.m., no subject line. No explanation. Ethan arrived at the small conference room on the 11th floor right on time. The room was narrow, with frosted glass walls and white lighting that made everything feel cold and impersonal. Janine from HR was already seated, her laptop open in front of her. Hawthorne arrived later, as always late enough to assert authority. Janine didn't waste time. She looked at her screen and spoke evenly, like she was reading a weather report. "Ethan, we're conducting an internal review." Ethan blinked. "Review? About what?" Hawthorne placed a thick folder on the table. The dull thud echoed sharply, enough to make Ethan flinch. "Financial irregularities," Hawthorne said slowly. "Your access was used." The blood drained from Ethan's legs. He shook his head on instinct. "That's impossible." "I didn't." Janine cut him off with a professional smile, the kind that carried no feeling, only procedure. "We're not accusing you," she said. Clarifying, Hawthorne tilted his head, his gaze fixed on Ethan, as if watching a chemical reaction. "Help us clarify, then." In that moment, Ethan understood. They didn't need the truth. They didn't need version histories or technical proof. They needed a person. A name plausible enough to carry the problem. Someone no one would step forward to defend. And when Ethan looked around the room, at the two people in front of him, the glass wall behind him, he realized there was no one else. The meeting ended quickly, no conclusions. No reassurance. Just vague language, enough to leave him suspended, not accused, but no longer safe. When Ethan stepped out of the room, the long hallway stretched out before him. He walked slowly, as if each step weighed more than the last. He glanced toward the open workspace. Familiar faces appeared, people who had smiled with him by the coffee machine, asked him for last-minute fixes, eaten lunch with him while complaining about deadlines. Now they avoided his eyes. One person bent toward their screen. One pretended to take a call. One stood up and walked away. No one asked. No one greeted him. No one said, "What's going on?" The scene felt painfully familiar. Ethan stopped. In his mind, the image of Daniel in that meeting room 3 months earlier resurfaced alone, facing a row of lowered laptops, the same silence, the same invisible distance. He felt cold. And a sentence rose in his mind, clear and impossible to deny. "I taught them how to treat me." By staying silent for Daniel, by lowering his head when the truth needed a voice. He had taught them something very simple and very cruel. Silence is the rule here. A week later, Ethan was temporarily suspended. No pay. No system access. No explanation clear enough to tell him where he stood, just a suspended state, as if he were hanging between 2 layers of air. The email from HR was so brief it felt cold, ending with a hollow sentence. "We'll be in touch." Laura read the email on his phone. Her eyes widened, her hand tightening as if trying to hold on to something about to fall. Laura, you have to do something. Sue them. Ethan dropped onto the sofa. It felt as if someone had drained the blood from his body. The familiar living room suddenly felt foreign. Everything was there, but nothing felt solid. He stared into the empty space in front of him and spoke very softly, as if asking himself, Ethan, who would testify for me? Laura opened her mouth, then stopped. Not because she didn't want to answer, but because the answer was already clear. The next day, Ethan called Mark, the colleague he had trusted the most. They used to have lunch together every Friday. They had complained about deadlines, about bosses, about the small things that made work feel lighter. The phone rang longer than usual. Mark picked up, his voice rushed, as if he were walking quickly through a crowded hallway. Mark, Ethan, I can't talk. I'm sorry. Ethan stood still in the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, forcing his voice to stay calm. Ethan, Mark, just tell them I didn't. Mark, I have a family too. Click, the call ended cleanly, without echo. Ethan stared at the dark screen. In that moment, he understood how Daniel must have felt, not on the day he was fired, but in the days after, when people no longer dared to meet his eyes. When relationships that had once been ordinary suddenly turned into risks. It isn't losing a job that destroys a person. It's the feeling of being abandoned by the world. Because everyone is afraid. That evening, Ethan sat at the dining table with Mia. She was focused on her homework, her pencil moving slowly across the page. The warm light spilled over her hair, making the scene look peaceful, too peaceful compared to the storm tightening in his chest. Mia looked up, her eyes clear. Mia, Daddy, why didn't anyone help you? The question landed lightly. No blame. No judgment. Just curiosity, the kind a child has when they believe the world runs on fair rules. Ethan opened his mouth, then stopped. What could he say? That people were afraid. That silence was safer than truth? That he himself had once chosen silence? There was no answer that didn't shame him. Ethan looked at his daughter. At the way Mia waited patient, trusting for her father to offer a reasonable explanation. But he said nothing. He just looked at her and stayed silent. And in that moment, Ethan understood something more painful than losing his job. He hadn't just lost his income, not just his reputation. He was losing his right to be respected in his daughter's eyes. Ethan began digging through everything in the makeshift home office. Once, used only to pay bills and tweak a few personal files. Now, it had become the final battleground. He opened his laptop before dawn, the glow of the screen washing over his hollowed face. Old emails. Long threads that once seemed meaningless polite greetings, unnecessary CCS, file version histories. Each edit appearing like footprints left in snow. Access logs, code numbers, precise to the point of cruelty. Ethan traced every timestamp, every small detail he had never paid attention to before. He worked slowly, not from exhaustion, but from fear. Fear that he would find nothing at all. Fear that all this effort was just a way to delay the collapse. Then he saw it. A late-night access outside work hours, outside any normal schedule. Not his account. Not Daniel's. The username was clear, exposed on the screen. Hawthorne.admin. Ethan's hands trembled. Not from triumph, but from confirmation. The truth had been there from the beginning. He just hadn't dared to look at it. He leaned back in his chair, breathing hard, as if he'd run a long distance. His heart pounded, but this time it wasn't fear. This time it was because he had proof. But proof was only half of it. The other half was what he had been missing all along. Someone willing to stand up and say it out loud. Ethan sat there for a long time. Faces passed through his mind. Mark, former co-workers, people who had once smiled at him, but he knew. None of them would speak. Not because they were bad people, but because they were exactly who he had been 3 months earlier. Then one name surfaced, painfully clear, Daniel. This time, Ethan didn't push the thought away. He found Daniel's number through an old contact, a call filled with apologies, half-finished explanations. When he finally had the number, he stared at the screen for a long time, as if pressing call would make everything irreversible. The phone rang, once, twice, then long enough that it seemed no one would answer. Finally, Daniel's voice came through hoarse and tired, like someone who had learned not to expect good things. "Daniel." "Hello." Ethan swallowed. All the prepared sentences dissolved. "Ethan." "Daniel." "It's Ethan." Silence followed. Not the awkward kind, but the silence of someone deciding whether to continue. Then Daniel exhaled a light but heavy breath, carrying the weight of months gone by. "Daniel, so now you speak." Ethan closed his eyes. The words weren't loud, not angry, but they struck him harder than any accusation. "Ethan, I'm sorry. I saw what happened. I didn't say anything." On the other end, there was a short, dry laugh. "Daniel, I lost my job. My wife left. I had to move in with my brother. You know what hurt the most?" Ethan gripped the phone tighter, his voice barely more than breath. "Ethan, what?" Daniel spoke slowly, each word landing clearly. "Daniel, not Hawthorne. Not HR. It was a room full of good people." Looking down, Ethan felt his throat tighten. Old images rushed back, rows of lowered laptops, averted eyes. He swallowed hard. "Ethan, I have proof now. They're doing it to me." Daniel was silent for a few seconds. When he spoke again, the bitterness was gone, replaced by the clear-eyed exhaustion of someone who had already paid the price. "Daniel, you want me to help you?" Ethan didn't dare demand anything. He told the truth for the first time in a long while. "Ethan, I want to fix what I broke." The line went quiet. Then Daniel replied one short sentence, sharp as a blade, heavy as a verdict. "Daniel, then speak where it costs you." The next day, Ethan walked into the company, despite being suspended. No access badge, no notification email. No legal right to be there, but he went anyway. The main lobby of Stonebridge was bright as ever, immaculate to the point of indifference. A security guard glanced at him, hesitated for a beat, then looked away. Maybe they assumed he was just another employee running late. Or maybe, like so many others, they simply didn't want to get involved. Ethan didn't stop. He headed straight for the elevators and pressed the button for the executive floor. His heart was pounding, but strangely, his mind was clear. All hesitation had been left behind. All fear had burned itself out during sleepless nights. The conference room doors opened just as Hawthorne was standing at the front, presenting in his familiar, confident voice. The screen displayed polished numbers built on the silence of many people. When Ethan stepped inside, everyone turned to look at him. No one spoke. No one asked why he was there. His presence broke the room's perfect rhythm, like a wrong note no one wanted to acknowledge. Janine was the first to stand. Her chair scraped sharply against the floor. "Ethan, you're not authorized." Ethan didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He simply raised his phone, his hand trembling slightly, his voice clearer than he expected. "I have evidence, and I'm sending it to the board." And to legal. The room froze. No whispers, no typing. No one dared move. Ethan saw a few people start to look down the old reflex. But this time, they were too slow. They had heard him. And they knew this was no longer something they could pretend hadn't happened. Hawthorne remained standing. He smiled the polite, well-practiced smile. But his eyes darkened, as if someone had switched off the lights behind them. "Careful, Ethan," Hawthorne said slowly. "You don't want to destroy your future." In that moment, Ethan realized this was the sentence that had kept everyone silent for years. Not an outright threat, but a gentle reminder that loss would follow if you spoke. Ethan looked straight at Hawthorne, for the first time in years, without avoiding his gaze, without lowering his head. "You already destroyed it," he said. "I just didn't notice. Until it was my turn." No one breathed loudly. No one moved. The sentence didn't need emphasis. It stood on its own in the room. Ethan looked down at his phone. His finger hovered over the screen for exactly 1 beat, as if giving himself a final chance to turn back. Then he pressed send. The sound was very small, almost non-existent, but everyone in the room heard it. There was no applause. No one stood up. No heroic moment. Only silent faces, each person wondering what this would mean for them. Ethan didn't wait for a reaction. He turned and walked out of the conference room as if he had completed the only thing he needed to do there. In the hallway, his steps slowed. When the door closed behind him, Ethan began to shake. Not from fear, but because all the tension had finally found a way out. He leaned lightly against the wall and took a deep breath. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if he would win. He didn't know how high the cost would be. But Ethan knew one thing for certain. This was the first time he had done the right thing, without knowing whether he would win. Ethan didn't win right away. There were no handcuffs on Hawthorne. No heroic moment. Only one thing was certain. Silence had once felt like armor, but in truth, it was a noose. Because no law was broken. There was no single, obvious villain in the room. There were only many good people who chose silence at the same time. And that was enough. If silence is always the easiest choice, then who pays the price for the truth?